Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into, well, sleep.
Sleep.
Yeah, but not exactly the kind you're probably thinking of. We're going to be looking at a sermon
Okay.
by C.H. Spurgeon from, like, way back in 1855 called The Peculiar Sleep of the Beloved.
Interesting.
It's all about, like, how sleep can be this metaphor for different spiritual states, which I think is a pretty cool idea, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. It's fascinating to consider how people viewed rest and faith back then, especially in a time when, life was so much harder. I mean, no cars, no electricity.
Right. Like, can you imagine trying to get a good night's sleep when you're worried about, I don't know, like your crops failing or something?
Exactly. So, to start with, Spurgeon lays out this idea that might seem obvious now, but it's kind of profound when you really think about it.
What's that?
He says that sleep, even just regular literal sleep, is a gift.
From God.
Yeah, from God, not something we earn or can totally control.
I guess that's true. Like, you ever just lie awake at night, just like totally unable to fall asleep?
Oh, absolutely. And I think in 1855, that idea would hit home even harder.
How so?
Well, imagine working in the fields all day, right?
Yeah.
And then you can't sleep because you're worried about whether it'll rain or if your kids are going to get sick.
Yeah, I guess you wouldn't have a lot of control over things like that.
Not at all. So, to them, seeing sleep as a gift, it would change your whole perspective.
Like, from feeling entitled to it to actually feeling thankful when you get it.
Exactly. And then from there, Spurgeon gets into all these different types of sleep, metaphorically speaking, that he says believers experience.
He calls them the beloved. Right.
Right. It's like he's using this everyday thing, sleep, to help people understand these bigger, more complex spiritual ideas.
Kind of like a parable or something.
Yeah, exactly. And that was a common thing in religious texts, to use metaphors like that.
So what kind of sleeps does he talk about?
Well, one of the first ones he mentions is the sleep of carnal ease.
Carnal. What does that even mean?
Yeah, it's an older word. It basically means focused on worldly stuff instead of spiritual things.
Ah, okay.
So this sleep is talking about people who are spiritually indifferent, They're not really paying attention to their spiritual growth.
It's like they're asleep at the wheel, spiritually speaking.
Yeah, exactly. Like imagine someone sleeping through harvest time and missing the chance to gather all the crops.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And then he contrasts that with another type of sleep, the sleep of carnal security.
And what's that one all about?
Well, it's this false sense of safety where you're ignoring the dangers around you. Kind of like, do you remember the story of Saul from the Bible?
Saul. Refresh my memory.
Yeah, so he's sleeping, right?
Mm.
And this guy, Abishai, sneaks up on him with a spear.
Oh, yeah. Now I remember. Talk about a close call.
Right. And that's kind of what Spurgeon's getting at. We might think we're safe and secure, but are we really paying attention to the things that could harm us spiritually?
Like, maybe we get comfortable in our routines or we're proud of our accomplishments and we kind of forget about, the bigger picture.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that true security doesn't come from our circumstances or our achievements.
Mm.
It comes from something deeper.
Makes you think about what we might be sleeping through in our own lives,
Yeah.
right?
And then, shifting gears a bit, he talks about this really interesting one called the sleep of a quiet conscience.
Quiet conscience.
Yeah, and to illustrate this one, he tells the story of this guy, the Earl of Argyll.
Okay, I don't know that one.
So he's about to be executed,
Oh, wow.
but the night before, he sleeps peacefully.
Really? How is that even possible?
Well, Spurgeon says it's because he had a clear conscience. He was at peace with God. And he contrasts that with people who are, tormented by guilt or anxiety.
I guess that makes sense, even if everything else is going wrong. If you have that inner peace, it can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. It shows how important it is to, make things right with God and with others.
To find that forgiveness and reconciliation.
Exactly. And then another sleep he talks about is one that I think a lot of people can relate to, the sleep of contentment.
Contentment.
Mm-hmm. He talks about how so many people are always searching for something more, always restless,
Yeah, always chasing after happiness in things or achievements or whatever.
Right. And to illustrate this, he uses this really vivid image. He talks about the castle of discontent
Okay.
and the cottage of contentment.
Interesting. So what are those supposed to represent?
Well, the castle is full of people who are never satisfied, always wanting more, always climbing higher.
Ah.
And the cottage, that's where the people are who have found joy in simple things, in
Mm.
trusting God to provide.
So it's not about being rich or successful. It's about having the right attitude.
More than that, even. It's about, like, recognizing where true contentment comes from. It's not about what we have, but about aligning our desires with God's will.
So it's about letting go of our own plans and ambitions and finding peace in His plan.
Exactly. Which, it can be hard to do. We're kind of wired to want more, to strive for more.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But Spurgeon is saying that true peace comes from surrendering, not from achieving.
That's a powerful thought. And it leads us to another kind of sleep. He talks about the sleep of security in the future.
Ah, yes. That one's all about facing the unknown, right?
Yeah, all the anxieties we have about what might happen, what we might lose. It's a big one for a lot of people.
Definitely. And Spurgeon contrasts that fear with the confidence that believers have in God's plan, even when things are uncertain.
And he even talks about his own assurance of salvation, which is pretty bold.
It is. It makes you think, where do we put our trust when we think about the future? Are we relying on ourselves or are we relying on God?
It's a good question. And then there's another one, what was it? The sleep of security amidst troubles.
Oh, yes, that one. That's a tough one to wrap your head around, isn't it?
Yeah, how can you be secure when things are going wrong? It seems impossible.
It does, doesn't it? But Spurgeon talks about how even when he was facing criticism and slander, he still found peace in his faith.
So it's not about avoiding problems, it's about finding a way to be okay, even when you're in the middle of them.
Exactly. It's like having this inner well of calmness that helps you weather the storm.
I think that's something that a lot of people could use these days, with all the stress and uncertainty in the world.
Yeah, for sure. It's a powerful reminder that true peace doesn't depend on our circumstances.
Right, comes from somewhere deeper.
And then finally, he talks about this sleep that was maybe more familiar to people back then than it is to us now.
What's that?
The sleep of happy dismissal. He's talking about death.
Oh, wow.
But he doesn't present it as this scary, negative thing. He talks about it as a peaceful transition.
Like a homecoming.
Yeah. Exactly. Going back to the source of true peace.
Yeah.
And he says, so he giveth his beloved sleep, which, there's just something so beautiful and comforting about that phrase.
It takes away some of the fear, right? It's like he's saying that even in death, God's love provides rest.
Exactly. It's a reminder that His care extends beyond this life.
So we've covered all these different types of sleep, all these ways that we can find rest in a world that often feels restless. But then Spurgeon throws out this challenge.
Oh, yeah. He asks, how do you know if you are one of these beloved, the ones who experience these sleeps?
Good point.
And he gives 3 tests: doctrine, experience, and practice.
Okay, break those down for me.
Sure. So doctrine, that's about what you believe, your understanding of God and faith.
Okay, got it.
Experience is like the personal side of faith, how it feels in your heart, how it impacts your life.
Right.
And then practice is how you live out your faith.
Yeah.
Your actions, your choices.
So he's not saying you have to pass some test to be saved or anything like that?
No, not at all. I think he's just encouraging people to really look at their lives and see if, their beliefs and their actions are lining up.
But see if they're walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. And for Spurgeon, that starts with having the right understanding of who God is and what He's done for us. He was a big believer in biblical truth.
He was known for being pretty firm in his beliefs, wasn't he?
Yeah, he definitely didn't shy away from controversy. He was a strong advocate for certain doctrines, like the doctrines of grace.
I've heard of those. They're all about God's sovereignty and salvation, right?
Exactly. And they had a big impact on Protestant theology.
So he really emphasized knowing the right stuff.
He did. But he also knew that true faith wasn't just about head knowledge.
Right, it has to be more than just knowing the facts.
Exactly. He talked about the need for a real personal experience of God's grace. He called it a conviction of sinfulness and a deep need for forgiveness.
It's like you can know all the right answers, but if your heart's not in it, it's not really faith, is it?
No, it's not. And Spurgeon believed that this kind of genuine, heartfelt faith would naturally lead to a changed life.
So you can't just say you believe something. You have to actually live it out.
Exactly. He called it practice. And he was pretty adamant that if your faith wasn't showing up in your actions, then something was off.
So it's not just about what we believe in our heads. It's about how our beliefs change our hearts and then how our hearts change our actions.
Yeah, it's all connected. And that's where true rest comes from, according to Spurgeon, from having all those pieces in alignment.
It's a pretty holistic view of faith, isn't it?
It is. It's about the whole person, not just one part.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. It makes you think about where you're finding your own rest,
What are you relying on? What are you chasing after?
Exactly.
Is it bringing you true peace?
That's the question. It's a real challenge, right? To not get caught up in the busyness of life and forget about what really matters.
Yeah, totally. So, going back to what we were talking about before, Spurgeon was a big proponent of those doctrines of grace, right?
He was.
But how did that fit in with his idea of finding rest? Like, did he think it was all up to God, or did he think we had a part to play in it?
That's a great question, and it kind of gets to the heart of some pretty deep theological discussions.
Right.
Spurgeon, he was absolutely convinced that salvation and the kind of deep soul rest that we've been talking about, it's ultimately a gift from God. We can't earn it no matter how hard we try.
Okay, I get that. But he also talked a lot about how true faith would show itself in good works and a changed life, right?
Exactly. So it's not like we just sit back and do nothing, just waiting for God to, like, zap us with rest.
So we do have a role to play.
In a way, yeah. But it's not about earning our salvation or our rest through good works.
Then what is it about?
It's more like the good works, they're the natural result of a heart that's been changed by God's grace.
I think I see what you mean. It's
Oh,
like, imagine a tree.
Okay, I'm following.
If it's planted by a river, it's going to bear fruit naturally, right?
Right.
It's not because the tree is trying super hard to make fruit happen. It's just the natural outcome of being in the right place, getting the right nourishment.
That's a great analogy.
So even though Spurgeon had these really strong beliefs about doctrine and theology,
Mhm.
he also understood that faith has to go beyond just like knowing the right stuff in your head.
Absolutely. It has to be something you feel, something you experience in your heart. He talked about needing a real encounter with God's grace.
So not just knowing the right answers, but having your heart changed by them.
Exactly. He talked about feeling convicted of your own sinfulness
Yeah.
and realizing how desperately you need God's forgiveness.
It's like a complete shift in perspective, isn't it?
It is. And from that place of humility and gratitude, you start to see the world differently. You start to understand God's love in a whole new way.
And that's what leads to those outward changes, the practice that Spurgeon talked about.
Yeah, it's all connected. The way we live our lives, the choices we make, how we treat other people, all of that flows from that inner transformation.
Right. And it's not always easy, is it, putting our faith into action like that?
No, it's not. But Spurgeon believed it was essential. He had this great quote. I think it was something like, "A good character is the best tombstone.
Wow, I like that.
Those who loved you and were helped by you will remember you when forget-me-nots have withered.
Powerful.
Carve your name on hearts, not on marble."
It's like he's saying that our actions, they have a ripple effect, that
Yeah.
they can leave a lasting mark on the world.
Exactly. And that's what it means to truly live out our faith, to let it shape not just our beliefs, but our actions, our relationships, everything.
That makes me think of that verse, something about coming to Jesus when you're weary and he'll give you rest.
Oh, yes. From Matthew, right?
Mm.
"Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest.
That's the one.
Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls."
For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. It's like those words perfectly capture what Spurgeon was getting at, right?
They do. It's about coming to Christ, just as we are, surrendering our burdens to him and allowing him to lead us.
It's not about achieving some kind of perfect stress-free life, but about finding a deep down peace that comes from knowing we're loved and cared for by God no matter what.
And that peace, that rest,
Yeah.
it allows us to face whatever challenges come our way with courage and hope. It's the foundation for a life lived in alignment with God's will.
Spurgeon really makes us think about where we're looking for rest in our lives, doesn't he?
He does. He challenges us to examine our priorities, our desires, our fears, and to ask ourselves, are we seeking rest in the things of this world or in the unshakable presence of God?
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? Where are we placing our trust? What are we ultimately relying on for a sense of peace and security?
Exactly.
And I think that's what's so powerful about this idea of peculiar sleep. It's not just about getting enough hours of shut-eye at night.
Right. It's about finding a spiritual rest that goes deeper than our circumstances. A rest that flows from a deep, abiding relationship with God. A rest that allows us to live fully, to love deeply, and to face the future with confidence.
Knowing that we're never truly alone.
And knowing that even in death, we are held in God's loving embrace.
It's a message that, it's a message that speaks to something deep within us, don't you think?
It does. It's a message that resonates across time and cultures because it speaks to a longing that we all share, a longing for true and lasting peace.
A longing for rest.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like he's showing us this whole path, from being totally asleep spiritually to waking up and finding that real deep rest in God.
And what's really cool is that he doesn't say we have to, like, force our way there or earn it somehow.
He keeps coming back to that idea of grace, right?
Exactly. That true peace. It's a gift, something we receive, not something we achieve.
Mm.
Which, man, that's such a refreshing thought, especially these days when everything's about, hustling and grinding and proving yourself.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in that whole mentality of like, I got to do more, be more, have more, and forget that, hey, maybe it's okay to just be.
Right. Like maybe we're already enough just as we are because of God's love. We don't have to constantly strive to prove our worth.
And that ties back to what we were saying about experience, right? Spurgeon was big on that personal encounter with God's grace, not just knowing the right things, but feeling them in your heart.
Absolutely. He knew that real faith, it's more than just a list of beliefs. It's a relationship. It's something that changes you from the inside out.
So let's say someone's listening to this and they're feeling kind of restless. Maybe they haven't found that deep soul rest yet. What advice would you give them?
Honestly, I just say start where you are. Talk to God. Tell him what you're struggling with, what you're longing for.
Don't be afraid to be real with him.
Exactly. Because it's often in those moments of vulnerability when we admit that we need help, that's when we really experience his grace.
It's like taking that first step, even if it's a small one, and trusting that he'll meet us there.
Right. And, as we keep taking those steps, reading the Bible, connecting with other believers, trying to live in a way that honors God.
That's when we start to experience that peculiar sleep that Spurgeon talks about.
Yeah, it's a journey. It doesn't happen overnight. But as we grow in our relationship with God, that rest, that peace, it starts to become more and more a part of who we are.
So it's not about reaching this perfect state of zero stress and zero problems in this life.
Yeah.
It's more about having that anchor for your soul.
That foundation of peace that helps you get through whatever comes your way.
That's a good way to put it. What really strikes me about Spurgeon's sermon is that it doesn't give you easy answers or quick fixes.
Right.
It's more like an invitation to think differently about rest.
To go deeper.
To see it as something that's rooted in our relationship with God, something that affects our whole being, not just our physical body.
And, I think that's what makes it so relevant even today. It speaks to this deep need that we all have for peace, for something that's bigger than ourselves.
Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into the peculiar sleep of the beloved. Hopefully, this has given you some things to think about.
Yeah, if you're interested in learning more, definitely check out the whole sermon.
It's well worth the read.
And hey, maybe you'll even experience a little bit of that peculiar sleep for yourself.
Until next time, sleep well.